Sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the biggest truths. In the carefully choreographed world of British royalty, where every piece of jewelry tells a story and every public appearance is scrutinized by millions, one unexpected moment changed everything we thought we knew about the relationships behind palace doors. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the private quarters of Clarence House. No cameras were rolling, no reporters were present, and no official statements would be issued. Yet what transpired in those precious few minutes would ripple through the royal family in ways no one could have predicted. When Queen Consort Camilla reached for a delicate pearl necklace that didn't belong to her, one that carried the weight of tradition, the whispers of palace corridors, and the unspoken tensions between two women who had learned to navigate the same impossible world, she had no idea that her husband's reaction would silence not just the room, but changed the very foundation of how this modern royal family understood itself. This is the story of a necklace, a moment of human vulnerability, and a king's response that revealed more about love, loyalty, and forgiveness than any official royal biography ever could. It's a tale that begins long before that fateful afternoon, woven through years of careful diplomacy, unspoken rivalries, and the complex dance of women who married into the most watched family in the world. What happened next would surprise everyone, including Camilla herself. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Clarence House, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs that had witnessed decades of royal conversations. Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, stood before her dressing table, surrounded by the quiet luxury that had become her daily reality. The room smelled faintly of her favorite perfume, and the fresh flowers that staff replaced every other day, creating an atmosphere of controlled elegance that masked the underlying tensions of royal life. She had been married to Charles for nearly 2 decades now, yet there were still moments when the weight of her position felt impossible to bear. Today was one of those days. The upcoming charity gala required her to appear alongside Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and despite years of public civility, the relationship between the two women remained delicately balanced on the edge of polite formality. Camilla's fingers traced the edge of her jewelry box, a magnificent piece crafted from rosewood and lined with deep blue velvet. Inside lay the symbols of her new status, tiaras that once graced the heads of queens, brooches that had pinned the hopes of a nation through 2 world wars, and necklaces that carried stories spanning centuries. Each piece came with its own history, its own protocols, and its own unspoken rules about when and how they should be worn. The staff had already laid out her outfit for the evening, a deep navy dress that would photograph well under the harsh lights of the event. But something felt incomplete about the ensemble. Her usual sapphire set seemed too bold for the occasion, while her everyday pearls felt insufficiently grand for such an important gathering. She needed something that would project confidence without appearing to overshadow Catherine, who would undoubtedly look radiant in whatever the palace stylist had chosen for her. As Camilla pondered her options, her gaze fell upon a smaller jewelry case, tucked discreetly behind her larger collection. This particular box wasn't technically hers. It contained pieces that belonged to the Princess of Wales, items that had been temporarily relocated to Clarence House for safekeeping while Kensington Palace underwent renovations to its security systems. The arrangement had been made months ago, a purely practical decision that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. Charles had suggested it himself, noting that Clarence House had superior vault facilities and that it would only be for a few weeks. Catherine had graciously agreed, understanding the necessity of protecting such valuable historical pieces. But what had seemed like a simple logistical solution had created an unexpectedly intimate situation, having another woman's most precious possessions under her own roof. Camilla had tried not to think about the case too much, but its presence had become a constant, subtle reminder of the complex dynamics that defined her life. Every morning, she saw it there, a physical representation of the careful balance she had to maintain between her role as Charles's wife and her position in a family where she would always be, in some sense, the outsider who had found her way in. The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. Charles was making his way toward their private sitting room, where he always took his morning tea while reviewing the day's schedule. She could hear him speaking quietly with his private secretary, their voices carrying the familiar rhythm of a routine that had remained unchanged for years. There was something comforting about these predictable moments, small islands of normalcy in lives that were otherwise subject to constant public scrutiny. But today, something felt different. Perhaps it was the upcoming event, or maybe it was the growing pressure she felt to establish her own identity as queen consort while remaining respectful of those who had come before her. Whatever the cause, Camilla found herself drawn to that smaller jewelry case with an intensity that surprised her. She approached it slowly, her fingers hovering over the clasp. Inside, she knew, lay Catherine's personal collection, pieces chosen not by royal protocol, but by personal preference, jewelry that reflected the modern princess's own style and taste. There were contemporary designs mixed with vintage family heirlooms, a combination that perfectly captured Catherine's ability to honor tradition while making it relevant for a new generation. Among the collection was a necklace that had caught Camilla's attention from the moment it had arrived. It was a strand of perfectly matched pearls, not particularly large or ostentatious, but possessed of an elegance that spoke to its quality and history. The pearls had a subtle pink undertone that made them seem to glow with their own inner light, and the platinum clasp was decorated with a small diamond accent that added just enough sparkle to elevate the piece from simple to stunning. What made the necklace particularly special wasn't just its beauty, but its story. Camilla had overheard Catherine telling someone that it had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had worked as a seamstress before marrying a coal miner and raising 7 children in a small house in County Durham. The necklace had been the grandmother's one luxury, purchased with money saved penny by penny over several years, a symbol of her hopes for a better future for her family. Catherine's grandmother had worn the pearls on her wedding day, and later to every important family occasion until her death. Catherine herself had worn them on her first official royal engagement after her marriage, establishing them as a bridge between her common roots and her extraordinary destiny. The necklace represented everything that made Catherine special: her ability to remain grounded despite her elevated position, her respect for family history, and her understanding that true elegance came from within rather than from external symbols of wealth. As Camilla stood there, surrounded by the quiet luxury of her dressing room, she felt a sudden, unexpected connection to that simple strand of pearls. Like Catherine, she too had come to the royal family from outside, though her path had been far more complicated and controversial. She too understood what it meant to wear jewelry that carried the weight of other people's expectations and judgments. And she too knew the challenge of finding her place in an institution that had existed for centuries without her. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she owned tiaras worth millions, it was Catherine's modest family heirloom that seemed to speak to something deeper about the nature of belonging and acceptance. Those pearls had witnessed one woman's journey from poverty to respectability, just as Camilla's own jewelry now documented her transformation from divorced commoner to queen consort. Without fully understanding why, Camilla found herself opening the case. The pearls lay nestled in their protective silk lining, still warm with the memory of Catherine's skin. They seemed to beckon to her, promising something she couldn't quite name, perhaps the comfort of understanding or the possibility of connection across the divide that protocol and history had created between them. She lifted the necklace carefully, feeling the weight of each pearl against her palm. They were heavier than she had expected, dense with the accumulated wisdom of decades spent close to women's hearts. As she held them up to the light, she could see the subtle variations in color and texture that marked them as natural rather than cultured, evidence of the painstaking effort that Catherine's grandmother had made to acquire something truly beautiful. For a moment, Camilla simply stood there, holding another woman's treasured inheritance, feeling the strange intimacy of touching something so personal to someone she knew only through carefully orchestrated public interactions. The necklace seemed to bridge not just the gap between their different backgrounds, but also the emotional distance that royal protocol demanded they maintain. She glanced toward the mirror, imagining how the pearls might look against her navy dress. Would they complement her coloring the way they did Catherine's? Would they carry the same gentle elegance on her slightly different frame? More importantly, would wearing them somehow help her understand the younger woman she had watched from afar with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty? The questions multiplied in her mind as she continued to hold the necklace, each pearl seeming to whisper its own story of the women who had worn it before. This wasn't just about jewelry anymore. It was about legacy, about the invisible threads that connected one generation of royal women to the next, about the possibility that understanding might bridge even the most carefully maintained divides. As the morning light shifted across the room, casting new shadows and highlighting different details of her surroundings, Camilla realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could carefully replace the necklace in its case and select something from her own collection, maintaining the safe boundaries that had governed her relationship with Catherine for years. Or she could take a different path, one that might lead to complications she couldn't predict, but also to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The choice seemed both insignificant and monumentally important, a single decision that could either preserve the status quo or change everything. As she stood there, pearls in hand, Camilla understood that whatever happened next would reveal something fundamental about who she was becoming as queen consort, and perhaps about who she had always been underneath the careful facade she had learned to maintain. The sound of Charles's voice grew closer, and she knew she had only moments to decide. But in those precious few seconds, holding Catherine's grandmother's pearls in the quiet sanctuary of her dressing room, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of genuine connection across the careful distances that royal life demanded. The pearls felt warm in her hands as Camilla made her decision. Almost without conscious thought, she found herself fastening the clasp behind her neck, feeling the familiar weight of jewelry settling against her collarbone. The sensation was different from her own pieces. These pearls seemed to carry with them the echo of other women's lives, other women's hopes, and dreams and quiet moments of beauty. She turned toward the mirror, expecting to feel guilt or uncertainty about her impulsive choice. Instead, she felt something entirely unexpected, a sense of rightness, as if the necklace had been waiting for this moment to fulfill some deeper purpose than mere ornamentation. The pearls complemented her complexion in a way that surprised her, their subtle pink undertones bringing out warmth in her skin that her usual jewelry somehow missed. But, more than that, wearing Catherine's family heirloom seemed to connect her to something larger than herself. For the first time since becoming queen consort, she felt less like an intruder in someone else's story, and more like a participant in a continuing narrative about women who had found ways to create meaning and beauty despite circumstances they couldn't control. The sound of the door opening behind her made her heart skip, but she didn't turn around immediately. She knew it would be Charles. No one else would enter their private quarters without knocking. But she needed a moment to prepare herself for whatever conversation might follow. She had no explanation ready for why she was wearing Catherine's necklace, no carefully crafted justification for the impulse that had led her to this moment. "Darling, I thought we might review the guest list for tonight before." Charles's voice stopped abruptly as he caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She watched his face change as he recognized the necklace, saw his expression shift from casual affection to something more complex and unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Camilla felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, suddenly aware of how presumptuous her action might seem. She had crossed a line, violated the careful boundaries that governed the storage of Catherine's possessions in their home. Worse, she had done so for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate, even to herself. "I'm sorry," she began, her hands moving instinctively toward the clasp. "I don't know what came over me. I'll take it off immediately." But Charles raised his hand, a gesture that stopped her movement without being commanding. His eyes, she noticed, weren't angry or disapproving. Instead, they held something she had rarely seen there when the subject of Catherine arose. Genuine curiosity mixed with what might have been understanding. "Wait," he said quietly, stepping closer to get a better look. "Don't remove it just yet." He moved behind her, studying her reflection in the mirror as she had been doing moments before. His gaze was thoughtful, analytical in the way she had learned to associate with his most important decisions. She could see him processing not just the visual impact of the necklace against her outfit, but something deeper about what this moment might mean. "You know," he said finally, his voice carrying a note of surprise, "I remember when Catherine first wore those pearls to a royal engagement. It was that literacy charity event in Manchester, do you recall? The press made quite a fuss about her choice to wear a family piece rather than something from the royal collection." Camilla nodded, remembering the coverage. The fashion magazines had praised Catherine's decision as both touching and strategic, a way of honoring her heritage while establishing her unique identity within the royal family. At the time, Camilla had admired the choice from a distance, recognizing the skillful way Catherine had managed to appear both humble and confident. "What struck me then," Charles continued, "wasn't just how beautiful the necklace was, but how it seemed to transform her. She carried herself differently that night, with a kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing she was honoring something meaningful to her family." He paused, studying Camilla's reflection more intently. "I see something similar happening now." The observation surprised her. She had expected criticism, perhaps gentle disapproval for overstepping boundaries. Instead, Charles seemed to be recognizing something in her that she was only beginning to understand herself. The necklace did make her feel different, more grounded, somehow less concerned with projecting an image, and more focused on expressing something authentic. "I should return it," she said again, though with less conviction than before. "Catherine will be arriving soon for the final preparations, and I wouldn't want her to think—" "What would you want her to think?" Charles interrupted gently. The question wasn't accusatory. It seemed to come from genuine curiosity about her motivations. Camilla considered this, staring at her reflection as if the answer might be written there. What did she want Catherine to think? That she was trying to appropriate something that didn't belong to her? That she was attempting to establish some claim over Catherine's personal possessions? Or something else entirely? "I suppose," she said slowly, "I'd want her to understand that I recognize how special this piece is. Not just as jewelry, but as a symbol of the journey her family has made. Her grandmother's story, the way Catherine has honored that legacy while creating her own path. It's something I find myself thinking about more than I probably should." Charles moved to stand beside her, both of them now facing the mirror together. In the reflection, she could see how the years had changed them both, how they had grown into their roles as senior members of the royal family. But she could also see, in this moment, something more fundamental. Two people who had learned to navigate an impossible situation with grace and mutual respect. "You know what I think Catherine would see if she walked in right now?" Charles asked. "I think she'd see a woman who understands the weight of carrying other people's expectations, who knows what it means to honor the past while creating space for herself in the present." His words surprised her with their insight. Throughout their marriage, Charles had proven himself to be more emotionally perceptive than his public image suggested, but this level of understanding about the complex dynamics between her and Catherine was new. "The press has always wanted to create drama between the two of you," he continued. "They've built entire narratives around supposed rivalries and tensions that exist more in their imagination than in reality. But what they've never understood is that you and Catherine actually have more in common than either of you might have expected." Camilla turned to look at him directly, curious about this perspective she hadn't considered. "How do you mean?" "You both came to this family from outside," he said simply. "You both had to learn how to balance respect for tradition with your own individual identity. You've both faced criticism and scrutiny that would have broken lesser people. And you've both found ways to use your platforms to make a positive difference in ways that feel authentic to who you are." The comparison hadn't occurred to her before, but she could see the truth in it. Despite their different backgrounds and the different circumstances of their entry into the royal family, she and Catherine had indeed faced similar challenges. They had both had to learn the complex rules of royal protocol while maintaining their sense of self. They had both had to develop thick skin against criticism while remaining open to legitimate feedback. They had both had to find ways to support Charles and William while establishing their own areas of expertise and passion. Perhaps, Charles suggested gently, wearing Catherine's necklace isn't about taking something that doesn't belong to you. Perhaps it's about recognizing a connection that was always there, even if neither of you had found a way to acknowledge it. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. For years, Camilla had maintained a careful distance from Catherine, partly out of respect for the younger woman's position as future queen, but also out of uncertainty about whether genuine friendship was possible given their complex history and the public narratives that surrounded their relationship. But standing there, wearing Catherine's grandmother's pearls while Charles offered this new perspective on their connection, Camilla began to imagine possibilities she had never dared to consider. What if the careful politeness that had characterized their interactions wasn't the end goal, but merely the beginning? What if there was room for something more authentic, more meaningful? "She'll be here in 20 minutes, Charles said, glancing at his watch. "You could change into something else, return the necklace to its case, and continue as you always have." Or he let the sentence hang, leaving the alternative unstated but understood. She could wear the necklace tonight, face whatever questions or reactions might arise, and see what developed from there. It was a risk, one that could easily be misinterpreted or blown out of proportion by observers who were always eager to find drama in royal relationships. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to move beyond the careful boundaries that had defined her relationship with Catherine, to test whether the understanding Charles had described might actually exist beneath the surface of their formal interactions. Camilla looked at herself in the mirror once more, seeing not just a woman wearing beautiful jewelry, but someone who was contemplating a fundamental shift in how she approached one of the most important relationships in her life. The pearls seemed to encourage her, their gentle glow a reminder of the courage it had taken for Catherine's grandmother to save for something beautiful, and for Catherine herself to honor that legacy while creating her own. "What do you think she'll say?" Camilla asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Charles smiled, the expression transforming his face in a way that reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him all those years ago. "I think," he said, "that Catherine might surprise you. And I think you might surprise her too." The possibility hung between them like a promise, fragile but real. In 20 minutes, Catherine would arrive for the final preparations for the evening's event. In 20 minutes, Camilla would discover whether her impulsive decision to wear the pearls would lead to the disaster she feared or the connection she had never dared to hope for. But for now, in the quiet privacy of their dressing room, with Charles beside her and Catherine's grandmother's pearls warm against her throat, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the courage to be vulnerable, to risk misunderstanding in pursuit of genuine understanding. Whatever happened next, she knew she wouldn't regret taking the step toward authenticity, toward the possibility that even the most carefully maintained boundaries might sometimes be meant to be crossed. The sound of car doors closing in the courtyard below sent a flutter of nervous energy through Camilla's chest. Catherine had arrived, precisely on schedule as always, accompanied by the quiet efficiency of royal protection officers and the subtle choreography that surrounded every movement of the Princess of Wales. Through the window, Camilla could see the familiar figure emerging from the official car, her posture perfect despite what must have been a long day of engagements. Even from a distance, Catherine looked radiant. Her hair was styled in the elegant updo that had become her signature for formal events, and she wore a coat that managed to be both practical and sophisticated. As always, she moved with the kind of natural grace that couldn't be taught, the quality that had first caught the public's attention when she was still just William's girlfriend navigating the complexities of royal protocol. Camilla touched the pearls at her throat, feeling their familiar weight against her skin. She had worn them for nearly an hour now, and they had begun to feel less like a borrowed accessory and more like a natural part of her appearance. But she knew that the real test was about to begin. Whatever understanding she had reached with Charles in the privacy of their dressing room would soon be tested against the reality of Catherine's reaction. "She's here," Charles observed unnecessarily, moving to stand beside her at the window. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that whatever happened, she wouldn't face it alone. Throughout their marriage, he had proven himself to be a steady source of support during moments of uncertainty, and she was grateful for his calm confidence now. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness as they listened to the sounds of Catherine's arrival filtering up from the floors below. There would be the usual greetings with staff, the brief consultation with security about the evening schedule, the final review of logistics that accompanied every royal event. All of this would take perhaps 10 minutes, giving Camilla just enough time to question her decision while being unable to change it. Finally, they heard the familiar sound of footsteps on the stairs leading to their private quarters. Catherine's approach was announced by the soft murmur of voices, her own, warm and polite as always, mixed with the responses of staff members who clearly enjoyed working with her. Even her interactions with employees seemed effortless, marked by the kind of genuine interest and consideration that had made her genuinely popular among palace staff. The knock on the door, when it came, was gentle but confident. Catherine had learned, over her years in the family, how to signal her presence without seeming to demand attention, a skill that served her well in the complex hierarchy of royal relationships. "Come in," Charles called, and Camilla felt her heart rate accelerate as the door opened. Catherine entered with her characteristic smile, the expression that had graced thousands of photographs and charmed millions of people around the world. She was dressed for the evening's event in a deep green dress that complemented her coloring perfectly, and her jewelry was minimal. Just her wedding rings and a pair of simple gold earrings that William had given her for their anniversary. "Good evening," she said warmly, her gaze moving from Charles to Camilla with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly and accurately. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." For a moment, Catherine's attention was focused on Charles as they exchanged the usual pleasantries about the evening's schedule and the logistics of their joint appearance. But then, as was inevitable, her gaze shifted to Camilla, and Camilla saw the exact moment when Catherine noticed the necklace. The recognition was immediate and unmistakable. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, and her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she caught herself and restored her composed expression. But in that brief moment of surprise, Camilla caught a glimpse of something more vulnerable. Confusion, perhaps, or hurt, or simply the shock of seeing her most treasured family heirloom adorning someone else. The silence that followed felt endless, though it probably lasted only seconds. Camilla found herself holding her breath, waiting for Catherine's reaction, prepared for anything from anger to disappointment to the kind of cold politeness that would signal the permanent end of any possibility for genuine relationship between them. Instead, Catherine did something entirely unexpected. She stepped closer, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like curiosity. "My grandmother's pearls," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder rather than accusation. "I haven't seen them worn in months." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that none of them fully understood. Camilla felt the urge to explain herself, to offer some justification for her presumptuous choice, but something in Catherine's tone stopped her. There was no anger there, no territorial defensiveness that she had feared. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like recognition. "I should apologize," Camilla began, her voice unsteady. "I had no right to—" "No," Catherine interrupted gently, raising her hand in a gesture that was both graceful and definitive. "Please don't apologize. I am used, surprised, I suppose." But not unpleasantly so. She moved closer still, close enough that Camilla could see the genuine emotion in her eyes. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the necklace. Camilla nodded, uncertain what Catherine intended, but trusting that her request came from a place of sincerity rather than criticism. Catherine reached out with careful fingers, touching one of the pearls with a kind of reverence that spoke to deep emotional connection. I remember the first time my grandmother let me hold these, Catherine said softly. I was perhaps 6 years old, and I thought they were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. She told me about saving for them, about how she wore them on her wedding day, about all the special occasions they had witnessed over the years. As Catherine spoke, her expression grew more animated, as if the physical presence of the pearls was awakening memories that had been dormant for too long. She used to say that pearls held the wisdom of the women who wore them, that each time they were worn, they absorbed a little more understanding about what it meant to be strong and graceful under pressure. The observation struck Camilla as particularly poignant, given the circumstances under which they now found themselves. If Catherine's grandmother had been right about pearls absorbing wisdom, then these particular pearls had certainly witnessed their share of lessons about grace under pressure. When I wear them, Catherine continued, I always feel connected to her strength, and her determination to create beauty in her life despite very difficult circumstances. They remind me that elegance isn't about having expensive things. It's about carrying yourself with dignity no matter what challenges you're facing. She looked up at Camilla then, and their eyes met with an intensity that neither of them had shared before. Looking at you wearing them now, I can see that same quality, that same understanding of what it means to maintain grace when the world is watching your every move. The words hit Camilla with unexpected force. Throughout her years in the royal family, she had become accustomed to criticism, to being judged for her past and her present choices. But Catherine's observation wasn't about her history or her mistakes. It was about the strength she had developed, the resilience she had learned to cultivate in the face of constant scrutiny. You see, Catherine continued, I think my grandmother would have liked you very much. She understood what it meant to be an outsider who had to prove herself worthy of acceptance. She knew about judgment and criticism, about having to work twice as hard to earn respect that others took for granted. Charles, who had been watching this exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about your grandmother quite that way before, he said to Catherine. Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her face with genuine warmth. I suppose I've never met anyone before who reminded me so much of her spirit. She had this quality, this ability to remain kind and gracious even when people were unkind to her. She never let other people's prejudices change who she was at her core. The parallel was clear, and Camilla felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. After years of careful distance, of polite but guarded interactions, Catherine was offering something she had never expected: understanding, recognition, and perhaps even acceptance. I want you to keep wearing them tonight, Catherine said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of determination that surprised them all. In fact, I insist upon it. Catherine, I couldn't possibly, Camilla began, but the younger woman shook her head firmly. My grandmother always said that beautiful things were meant to be shared, that keeping them locked away diminished their power to bring joy and connection. Tonight, wearing her pearls, you're honoring her memory in a way I never could have anticipated, but that feels absolutely right. She paused, seeming to gather courage for what she wanted to say next. Besides, I think it's time we stop pretending that we don't understand each other. We've been so careful, so polite, so concerned with maintaining appropriate boundaries that we've missed opportunities for genuine connection. But seeing you in those pearls, seeing how naturally you wear them, it makes me think that maybe we've been overthinking this whole relationship. The admission hung between them like a bridge that had suddenly appeared across a chasm neither had been sure they could cross. For years, they had maintained the careful dance of royal propriety, each respecting the other's position while keeping their true feelings carefully guarded. But Catherine's words suggested possibilities that neither had dared to voice before. What are you proposing? Camilla asked, though she thought she might already know the answer. Catherine's smile grew wider, more confident. I'm proposing that we stop being quite so careful with each other, that we allow ourselves to be human beings first and royal figures second, that we acknowledge what I think we've both known for a while, that we actually have more in common than protocol has allowed us to explore. The suggestion was both simple and revolutionary. In the carefully choreographed world of royal relationships, genuine friendship between women in their positions was rare and precious. But Catherine was offering exactly that, the possibility of moving beyond formal politeness into something more authentic and meaningful. As Camilla looked at Catherine's earnest, hopeful expression, she realized that the pearls around her neck had indeed worked their magic, just as Catherine's grandmother had predicted. They had absorbed the wisdom of strong women and now seemed to be offering that wisdom back, creating a moment of understanding that transcended the careful boundaries that had defined their relationship until now. Whatever happened to the gala tonight, Camilla knew that this moment had changed everything. The question now was whether they would both have the courage to build upon this unexpected foundation of mutual recognition and respect. What happened next would be remembered by all three of them as the moment when understanding transcended protocol, when genuine human connection proved more powerful than the careful constraints of royal tradition. Charles, who had been quietly observing the exchange between the two women, stepped forward with an expression that none of them had seen before, a mixture of pride, relief, and something that looked remarkably like joy. "Do you know," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of careful observation and deeper understanding than either woman had realized he possessed, "I have been waiting for this moment for longer than I care to admit." Both Camilla and Catherine turned to look at him, surprised by the emotion in his voice and the intensity of his gaze. Charles was not generally given to dramatic pronouncements, preferring instead the measured consideration that had characterized his public life for decades. But something about this moment seemed to have broken through his usual reserve, revealing depths of feeling that he rarely displayed. "Waiting for what exactly?" Catherine asked, though her voice suggested she might already understand the answer. Charles moved closer to them, his presence creating an intimate triangle in the spacious room. "For you two to recognize what I have seen for years, but could never find a way to facilitate. You are in many ways the two strongest women I know. You have both faced challenges that would have defeated lesser people, and you have both found ways to transform those challenges into sources of strength and wisdom." He paused, looking directly at Camilla with an expression of such tenderness that she felt her breath catch. "Camilla, you have spent years believing that your past disqualified you from being fully accepted by this family, that your mistakes made you unworthy of the position you now hold. But what you've never understood is that your journey, difficult as it has been, has given you qualities that this institution desperately needs." The words were spoken with such conviction that Camilla felt tears threatening again. Throughout their marriage, Charles had been supportive and loving, but he had rarely spoken so directly about the struggles she had faced or the strength she had developed in overcoming them. "And, Catherine," he continued, turning to face the younger woman, "you have carried the burden of being seen as perfect, as the ideal princess who never struggles or doubts or makes mistakes. But perfection isn't what makes someone qualified to serve in this role. It's resilience, compassion, and the ability to connect with people who are facing their own challenges." Catherine's composure wavered slightly at this unexpected insight into how Charles viewed her position in the family. Like Camilla, she had grown accustomed to careful praise and formal acknowledgement, but this level of personal understanding was new and surprisingly moving. "What I realized, watching this moment unfold," Charles continued, "is that you complement each other in ways that neither of you had recognized. Camilla, your experience with adversity and recovery has given you wisdom about forgiveness and second chances that this family needs to understand. Catherine, your natural grace and intuitive understanding of public sentiment brings a fresh perspective that helps us remain relevant to a changing world." The analysis was more perceptive than either woman had expected, and it reframed their relationship in terms that neither had previously considered. Instead of seeing themselves as occupying similar roles that might naturally create competition, Charles was suggesting that their different strengths and experiences created opportunities for mutual support and collaboration. "But more than that," he went on, his voice growing warmer, "I think you genuinely like each other. I've watched you at family gatherings, seen how you both try to include the other in conversations. Noticed how you each seem more relaxed when you're not worrying about saying the wrong thing or overstepping invisible boundaries. The observation was accurate in a way that surprised them both. Despite their careful politeness, there had been moments of genuine connection over the years. Shared glances during particularly tedious ceremonial events, quiet conversations about the challenges of raising children in the public eye, mutual support during difficult family moments that the press never learned about. So when I saw Camilla wearing Catherine's grandmother's pearls, Charles concluded, I didn't see an inappropriate gesture or a breach of protocol. I saw two women who were finally ready to acknowledge what I've hoped for all along. That friendship between you isn't just possible, it's natural. The silence that followed was different from the earlier moments of uncertainty. This time, the quiet was filled with possibility rather than anxiety, with the sense that something significant was shifting in the dynamics between all three of them. Catherine was the first to speak, her voice soft but clear. You know, there have been so many times when I wanted to ask you something, she said to Camilla, or share an observation about royal life, or simply have a conversation that wasn't carefully managed by protocol officers. But I was never sure if it would be welcome. Camilla felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I've had the same impulse so many times. There's something rather isolating about being constantly surrounded by people who are paid to agree with you. Isn't there? I've often thought that you might be one of the few people who could understand what that feels like. Exactly, Catherine exclaimed, her enthusiasm breaking through her usual composed demeanor. And there are so many aspects of this role that no amount of training really prepares you for. The weight of representing something larger than yourself, the constant awareness that your behavior reflects on the entire institution, the challenge of maintaining your own identity while serving something bigger than your personal interests. As Catherine spoke, Camilla found herself nodding in recognition. These were exactly the struggles she had faced, the internal conflicts that no one outside their unique situation could fully understand. To hear them articulated so clearly by someone who had navigated similar challenges was both validating and profoundly relieving. I remember my first solo engagement after the wedding, Catherine continued, when I realized that every word I spoke, every expression on my face, every choice about what to wear would be analyzed and interpreted by people I would never meet. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. And lonely, Camilla added quietly. That's the part that surprised me most. How lonely it could be even when you're constantly surrounded by people. The isolation of knowing that your authentic self has to be carefully managed and measured before it can be shared with the world. The acknowledgement of this shared experience seemed to release something that had been held in check for years. Both women began speaking more freely, sharing observations and experiences that they had carried alone, discovering parallels in their journeys that had been hidden beneath the surface of their formal interactions. Charles watched this exchange with growing satisfaction, occasionally contributing his own perspective but mostly allowing them to discover the natural rhythm of genuine conversation. His earlier insight proved accurate. They did genuinely enjoy each other's company once the barriers of excessive politeness had been lowered. As the conversation continued, the pearls around Camilla's neck seemed to take on even greater significance. They had become a catalyst for connection, a physical reminder that understanding could bridge differences in background, experience, and age. Catherine's grandmother's wisdom about pearls absorbing the wisdom of the women who wore them proved prophetic. The necklace had indeed facilitated exactly the kind of understanding she would have hoped for. You know, Catherine said eventually, glancing at her watch and realizing that their departure time was approaching. I think we should make this a tradition. Not necessarily sharing jewelry, she added with a laugh, but making time for real conversations without agendas or protocol officers or carefully managed talking points. Camilla felt her heart lift at the suggestion. I would like that very much. Perhaps we could start with tea next week? Somewhere private where we can continue this conversation without worrying about who might overhear or how our words might be interpreted. Perfect, Catherine agreed. And Camilla, I hope you'll keep wearing the pearls tonight. I think my grandmother would be delighted to know that her legacy was helping to build bridges rather than simply serving as decoration. The practical arrangements for their evening began to intrude as staff members appeared to coordinate their departure. But the atmosphere in the room had been fundamentally transformed. What had begun as a moment of potential crisis, Camilla's impulsive decision to wear Catherine's necklace, had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. The foundation for a genuine friendship between two women who had been denied that possibility by the constraints of their roles. As they made their way to the cars that would take them to the evening's event, Charles found himself reflecting on the unexpected wisdom of that morning's decision. Camilla's moment of vulnerability, her willingness to reach beyond the careful boundaries that had defined her relationship with Catherine, had created space for understanding that years of formal politeness had been unable to achieve. The pearls around Camilla's neck caught the light as they descended the stairs, each one seeming to glow with the satisfaction of a job well done. They had indeed absorbed wisdom from the women who wore them, and tonight they were passing that wisdom forward, creating connections that would strengthen not just the relationship between Camilla and Catherine, but the entire fabric of their modern royal family. As their cars pulled away from Clarence House, heading toward an event that would now be remembered not for a charitable purpose, but for the moment when two women chose understanding over protocol, Charles's response to Camilla's impulsive gesture had proven to be exactly what was needed. His recognition of the deeper currents beneath their surface politeness, his encouragement of their natural affinity for each other, and his gentle guidance toward authentic connection had transformed what could have been an awkward situation into a turning point that would define their relationships for years to come. The room they left behind seemed to hold the echo of their conversation, the energy of three people who had discovered that sometimes the most meaningful changes begin with the smallest gestures, like a woman putting on a necklace that didn't belong to her and discovering in that moment that belonging itself was far more flexible and forgiving than any of them had dared to hope.